are allowed to think big and dream big. How to generate different systems. Systems that provide stability and are nested within the harmony of nature. I'm excited to explore with you the intriguing bandwidth of information our researchers and friends have surfaced. Let's dive into our next topic to find out how we can actively shape a future worth pursuing and living for.
Hello, this is Parker Myers. I'm here with
Maris Grundy.
And here we are at the Lyceum Silo City project in Buffalo, New York. And we're going to talk a little bit about the system change that we see on site here and kind of give an overview of this beautiful project. So let's just jump right into it, Mars.
Yeah.
So let's just talk about the project, maybe give an overview of what we're looking at here. What are we sitting in front of, and how did it come to be this site now?
Sure, yeah. So my role here, so we're a nonprofit, and my role here is I'm executive director. It's myself, it's a woman named Olivia McCarthy, and then a gent named Josh Smith. It's the three of us running it here now. But the land that we're looking at is in Buffalo, New York. We're located on the Buffalo River, so just to kind of give ourselves a place-based centering. Yeah. We're on the Buffalo River. We're a stone's throw from Lake Erie. So just across Route 5, so right over there is Lake Erie, so kind of a water-based place. Yeah. So before colonial impact, this was, we've heard, hunting ground for the indigenous people who lived here, so this was Haudenosaunee hunting area, and it would have been, because of our being surrounded by water, it would have been wetland, riparian, upland zone kind of area. When white folks moved in, it became industrialized, and the industry that came in was mostly steel. So at first it was steel, and the steel plants were putting all of their waste product here. So if you were to dig down in our dirt, it is a mixture of ballast from rail. Our soils are very alkaline. We can chat more about that. But there's also, like, I'll find oyster shells, and it's not from like an ancient ocean. It's like this was a dumping ground. So the land that we're on actually was built up from dumping and waste. It's basically rubble from industry. Okay, so after industry was built up here, the grain silos were built. So we're actually surrounded right now by the largest collection of continuous pour concrete grain silos in the world, which is really cool. So these are grain elevators. They were used for storing grain. So ships would come, they would drop off the grain, they would hang out in these silos, and then they would go for processing, either to malting for things like beer, or they would be processed for things like bread. So we basically say, if you had family in the United States in around the 1920s, so these were built in the late 1800s, early 1900s. If you had family here at that time, your family was eating bread from this exact location, which is pretty cool. So over time, this location kind of got phased out as other trade routes became more popular. So this was like the St. Lawrence Seaway, the Welland Canal, and so it's kind of became defunct. So in 2006, a local businessman named Rick Smith bought the property, and he bought the property with the intention of making an ethanol factory. When he realized that an ethanol factory took more energy than to create than it did on the opposite, the output end of it. Or did it stop? Are you good? Okay. On the output end of it, he realized, like, okay, this is not the right function for this space. So this is a 27-acre, we call it a campus, so a 27-acre campus of post-industrial grain silos and urban wildlands. So at this point, it's grain silos and urban wildlands. So so he bought it, and he basically said yes to everything. It's been used as a cultural space. It began as a cultural space, so theater, opera, City of Light, which is a local kind of arts event, kind of an experiential, intensive art event, things like that, concerts, lots of them happen down here. So it was kind of as an art space. So I came on the scene with Josh in 2000 and I think maybe 13, 14, 15, around then, because we were both working at Push Buffalo, another, as you well know, kind of local social and environmental justice organization, and we were working in green infrastructure and blue economy. So basically we were looking at ways to clean our water before it gets back into the ground. So anyways, so we were kind of working in that field, and we needed a place to run our composting operations. So we just asked Rick, who owns this. So this is private property. I want to say straight up, this is private property, but it's been kind of engaged in an interesting way. So I want to talk about that, because how American to have, private property that's so accessible.
Yeah.
It's like a very rare thing. So anyways, so we came down and began composting down here. So we were doing vermicomposting. We were doing thermophilic composting, and because there was a lot of this kind of empty space to do so. So we were then using that for our installations at Push, for our green infrastructure installations at Push. And then it just kind of grew. So Josh and I both left Push in like 2017 and came down here to work full time doing a native plant greenhouse, which we'll chat more about. So we decided, we were like, okay, we need to focus on growing native plants, and we wanted to focus on composting specifically. Yeah. So the Lyceum came to be because there were all of these arts events going on. There were all of these ecological events going on, cultural events going on, and it felt like the Wild West. I mean, there was just like so much happening. Yeah. And we needed a way to bring it together and find cohesion in it. And where we ended up finding the cohesion is in a concept that we refer to as holistic urban land management. So it's the way that we approach land management in a city from a holistic perspective. Basically what that means to us is we look at, in every decision that we make, we consider our impact and our interaction with the planet. We consider our impact and interaction with local communities and historical communities that would have been in this area. And then we also look at kind of the cultural impact of anything we're doing kind of in the larger local sphere, as well as kind of national and international sphere. So we're basically trying to approach it considering what's been here before and being realistic about what's here in the future. So you just walked in and you walked past a housing development, right? Yeah. And so I feel like that really plays into kind of our direction of the space, in terms of we're realizing like, okay, their development is going to happen here. This is a very culturally hot spot, visually beautiful spot. I mean, this is a cool space and people want to be down here. And so instead of kind of ignoring that, we say, how can we incorporate that in a way that's meaningful? Yeah. And the same thing with the ecological element of this. So we're managing, with this holistic approach, we're managing these urban lands that for a long time had what we would call non-native or invasive. We like to call them non-native species, so species not native to North America that are growing here. And a lot of people, the approach when we're thinking about ecologically healing the land and what that looks like, we take an approach of regeneration, because these plants were here thriving. They were thriving here for a reason. So we have in Western New York the trifecta here on site, which is Phragmites australis, that's our Phragmites, right? Like kind of a wetland plant. We have Japanese knotweed, another one, and then we have mugwort, common mugwort. So those three basically dominated when we came down here. That's what was present. And just to paint the picture, we're looking at rail tracks, we're looking at rubble, we're looking at hardscaped concrete because of the silos. So the fact that these plants were able to grow here, and as I mentioned, in these extreme alkaline soils, we look at them as allies. We're like, okay, I think a lot of people would come and say, to restore, we have to scorch earth and start again. We do not take that approach at all. Instead, we say, how can we have meaningful impact with the native plants we're growing, which we can chat more about, but we're looking at the plants here as allies and saying, wow, you're making soil, you're making organic material, you were able to grow here when nothing else could. That to me is fantastic. So instead what we try to do is kind of create these meaningful pockets of native plantings that address the pollinator needs, right? So native plantings obviously are supporting native pollinators, which are kind of the basis of these food webs that we need here for healthy ecosystems. And so we approach it in terms of like, how do we honor what's here, do meaningful, impactful plantings for, I don't want to say should, for what would it be impactful for kind of native food webs, biodiversity needs of this area. And then also considering the future. Is this going to be developed, or how is this going to be used? So like, how do people play a role? Like, are people going to be walking through this 27-acre campus with their dogs every day? One of the things we have to consider is there in Buffalo are really large deer herds. And so there is intensive deer browse. And of course, in a city, you can't control deer population in a cost-effective way that makes folks happy, right? And I understand that completely. And so we have to think about like deer pressure, deer browse. So like when you and I go through and we're looking at these installations, I'll show you kind of some of the ways that we've been addressing that. You know, things like definitely deer exclusionary measures with like see-through fencing. But we also have kind of created this suite of species that seem to be, I mean, deer will eat anything if they're hungry enough, but this suite of species that deer tend to stay away from, things in the mint family, for instance, they're very aromatic and they have a sharp taste, and so the deer tend not to eat them unless they're desperate. And so we find, oh, these species thrive, let's plant more of these. So anyways, it kind of is us working with the land to see how can we facilitate movement forwards in terms of appreciating, like being mindful of like, okay, we're in this, as an organization, we're in systems, right? We're in like nonprofit systems. We're in Buffalo political systems. We're in the like Western New York regional Great Lakes ecological system. We're within our watershed. So we're trying to kind of find a balance while nodding to all of those things. So we're like tipping our hat at all of them and saying, okay, I see you. How might this impact us? There's obviously limitations. There are 3 staff people running this whole jam, but it does feel like we're in close contact in every decision-making process, so that we can be mindful of considerations that maybe the other ones aren't noticing. So that was a long thing, but
no, that's perfect. Thank you so much. We're just about at time here, so. Yeah, I really appreciate the insights you've given here. It's really a perfect overview. I think that's touching all the main large points of the site here. So yeah, thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me chat.